The ELP standards for AE are organized across 10 standards, and each standard is presented via 5 level descriptors correlating to what students at each proficiency level should be able to do to show mastery of the standard. Remember that the guiding principles we reviewed in Module 1 are ideas that helped support the creation of the standards. They also serve as a guide to implementing the standards. Later in the course, you will integrate the standards by creating a classroom activity and then reflecting on your experience later. Within the course materials, locate the ELP standards for AE document. Your assignment for this week will guide you as you familiarize yourself with the standards for reading, writing, speaking and listening, and language. You will see the full assignment and discussion questions after you finish watching this video. The College and Career Readiness Standards for Adult Education were created to guide educators as they work to provide instruction with sufficient academic rigor that would prepare students for the workforce and post-secondary education and training. Further toward the goal of college and career readiness for all, the ELP standards for AE were created to help English language learners to be prepared for post-secondary education in the workforce. The ELP standards for AE are aligned to the CCRS, which also validates the goal that students in classes that use the ELP standards for AE will be college and career ready. If you are interested in reading through other parts of the document, here are some pieces that I would recommend. They are not a part of your required reading assignment this week. However, it may be helpful to mark these topics within the document for future reference. If you were interested in the background information of the standards, read the introduction on pages 1 through 5. The introduction includes justification for the standards. On page 73, there is an integrated education and training example, where an ELA teacher works with ELLs interested in the healthcare industry. It describes how the teacher applies the standards in that context. Flip through the glossary on page A1 to familiarize yourself with the language used in the document. View 1 of the standards is on pages 21 through 30, and view 2 of the standards is on pages 35 through 70. Page 15 of the ELP standards for AE states, Standards 1 through 7 describe the language necessary for ELLs to engage in content-specific practices associated with state-adopted academic content standards. They begin with a focus on extraction of meaning. ELP standards 8 through 10 support ELP standards 1 through 7. They focus on the micro-level linguistic features such as determining the meaning of words and using appropriate speech and conventions of language. The standards are written as I can statements that can be the learning target of a lesson or activity. Each standard differentiates the target across 5 level descriptors. When working with multi-level classes, one standard may be the main objective for the lesson. Based on the students' proficiency levels, students could work on completing assignments that address various descriptors of that standard. Students should learn at a level that is appropriate to their proficiency. So, higher level students could complete activities that address the 5th level descriptors, and lower proficiency students could complete activities that address level 1. The standards are presented in 2 different views. Let's take a look at view 1. We are going to practice reading the standards together. View 1 focuses primarily on English language acquisition and connects skill development across the content areas of language arts, science, and math. It is important for students to be exposed to various science and math topics in the ELA classroom. Integration of these practices will serve as an introduction to skills students will be developing in higher levels of educational programming. In addition, students will be able to transition into adult basic education programming more easily. View 1 may be most useful when the main focus of instruction is English language acquisition connected to academic subject matter. Consequently, English language acquisition instructors may want to start by using View 1. Let's look at View 2. The second view begins with alignment to the college and career readiness standards. View 2 was created for use with ELLs who are in the adult basic education and adult secondary education classroom. Therefore, it is structured to bring academic content to the forefront. This view may be useful if you want to ensure that, while focusing on CCR standards-based academic content, you are also attending to the language acquisition needs of learners. Your teaching context will help you to know which view will be most useful for planning your instruction. As we work to understand how to use the standards, we are going to learn how to use View 1. Standard 8 shows an ELL can determine the meaning of words and phrases in oral presentations and literary and informational texts. Look at the differences across the levels, from the first level to the fifth. At the first level, students are asked to recognize the meaning of a few frequently occurring words, simple phrases, and formulaic expressions. This is a lower level thinking skill than what is required of the student at the fifth level, which states, determine the meaning of general academic and content-specific words and phrases, figurative language and connotative language, and idiomatic expressions. The fifth level requires more higher order thinking skills and requires more college and career readiness skills from the student. Now, let's unpack or break down a standard. Unpacking is a great process to use to examine and understand the components of each standard. It provides a framework to examine all the parts of a standard, its content or concepts, the skills used need to master that content, and the content in which students will use the skills. Unpacking also leads to thinking of an activity that will help students master the standard. I will provide strategies so that you will be successful in unpacking the standards when using the ELP standards for AE with your students. Refer to the ELP standards for adult education 1 on page 21. Begin by reading the standard or I can phrase. The standard is in the shaded box. It states, an ELL can construct meaning from oral presentations and literary and informational text through level-appropriate listening, reading, and viewing. Keep this in mind when working with each of the descriptors. The descriptors are in the non-shaded box. Look at the descriptors and determine what is appropriate for students in your class. Let's think about what skills needed for the student to be successful in meeting the standard at the fifth level. What should the learner be able to do? We can determine what is needed by looking at the verbs in the level descriptors within the standard. What verbs do you see that are important with the statement at the fifth proficiency level? Key verbs of this standard are determine, analyze, cite, and summarize. The verbs identify the skills that students should be able to demonstrate when they master the standard. Think about the concepts and content that are required of the student. What content is required of the student to be successful at the fifth level? Identify the nouns that connect to the verbs of the skills. Students must understand the following concepts to master the fifth level of the first standard: central ideas, development, specific details, and evidence. We want students to determine central ideas, analyze development of themes or ideas, cite specific details, and summarize a text. Let's think about how the student will show evidence of completing the standard. The standard states that students will use these skills and understand these concepts in the context of oral presentations and literary and informational text. What resources would help students to demonstrate the standard? What interesting informational texts could you use in the classroom? What speeches could the students view to learn about something that would be useful to them in their lives? What strategies could you use to help them understand the speech? The next step of unpacking the standard is to see how it applies to higher order thinking skills. Bloom's taxonomy is a pyramid that is used in educational settings to represent various levels of cognitive demand. A printable version of this document is accessible within the course materials, and it covers the use of Bloom's taxonomy in context. Knowing that we want students to reach their greatest potential, we should strive to help students reach higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. However, do not use activities that are overwhelming or even too difficult for students. Even literacy level students can complete tasks where they are creating something, which is the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy. At the same time, students at higher proficiency levels may need to practice lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy. It classifies cognitive abilities in 6 areas: remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. When we unpack standards, it is helpful to determine the highest level of thinking that students will be required to achieve. Many standards, such as this one, require students to work at various levels. This provides opportunities for instructors to scaffold instruction to ensure that students reach the highest level expected. The highest level of Bloom's taxonomy that is appropriate for this standard is analyzing. Let's think about the standard and activities that you might include in the classroom. Use activities to help students reach the analyzing level of Bloom's taxonomy. For example, students could analyze the meaning of Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech after watching it and reading the speech. Let's read the second and third levels of the first standard on page 21. As you can see, there are a couple of differences in what is required for the student to do at each level. At the second level, the ELL can use an emerging set of strategies to identify the main topic in oral presentations and simple spoken and written texts and retell a few key details. At the third level, the ELL can use a developing set of strategies to determine a central idea or theme in oral presentations and spoken and written texts. What is the contrast between these levels? At the second level, the ELL can use an emergent set of strategies, in contrast with the third level, where the ELL uses a developing set of strategies. The second level requires the learners to identify instead of determine, as at the third level. The second level also requires ELLs to retell a few key details, while the third level requires them to retell key details. In addition, learners are required to answer questions about key details. At the third level, explain how the theme is developed by specific details in a text, and summarize the text. Teachers should examine the level descriptors to identify exactly what the student needs.